Rain streamed down the glass walls of Maison Aurore, the kind of restaurant where power disguised itself as elegance. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above white marble floors, and the low hum of conversation floated beneath the music of a live piano. At a table by the window sat Elena Park. Her hands rested neatly on her lap, her dress soft ivory silk, her lipstick barely pink. The world outside blurred into silver lights as she checked her phone again, the message from Daniel Blind date #3. He had said he was excited to meet her. When the door opened, she knew it was him. Tall, well-dressed, confident. He scanned the tables, smiling until his gaze dropped to the wheelchair. To her, something in his face shifted. A pause, a hesitation. Then the practiced excuse. "Oh, I just remembered. I have an urgent call. I'm so sorry." The words fell like glass. He left. Elena sat there, motionless, every pair of eyes pretending not to look. The waiter hovered awkwardly. Someone whispered near the bar. But she simply adjusted the sleeve of her dress and looked out at the rain again. No tears, no scene. Only the quiet dignity of someone used to being stared at and refusing to shrink. From the mezzanine above, Jehun Vale watched in silence. The CEO of Vale Corporation, rumored to be ruthless, brilliant, untouchable. No one in that restaurant knew that the reason he never aged wasn't good genetics. It was because he had stopped living centuries ago. He didn't breathe often, didn't need to. But when he saw the way Elena straightened her back instead of lowering her gaze, something inside his chest moved. A faint echo of what used to be a heartbeat. He placed the glass of wine down. Its deep crimson surface rippled, like blood stirred by memory. Before his assistant could ask what was wrong, Ji-hoon was already descending the stairs. Conversation softened. The air thickened. His presence had gravity. When he reached her table, she looked up, startled. Everyone else seemed to recognize him instantly, the man who owned half the city's skyline. He didn't ask. He simply said, in a low voice that carried through the quiet restaurant, "If he had no courage to stay, allow me to be your partner tonight." A silence swept through the room. Elena blinked, unsure if she'd heard him right. "Sir, I think there's been a mistake." He extended his hand, not commanding, not pitying, simply offering. And something in his eyes told her that whatever this was, it wasn't charity, it was curiosity. When she placed her hand in his touch was cool as marble, yet her pulse raced, quick and vivid. Ji-hoon felt it. The warmth of her blood brushed against his skin, and for a fleeting second, he remembered what life felt like. He pulled her chair gently, guiding her toward the center of the room. The pianist, perhaps sensing the shift, began to play something slower, melancholic, cinematic. And beneath the golden lights, the immortal and the human began to move together. Not a dance, not exactly, more like two lonely souls trying to remember what connection felt like. People whispered, cameras rose. But Ji-hoon didn't care. For the first time in centuries, the hunger inside him wasn't for blood. It was for her. And neither of them knew that, by morning, her face would be the one name whispered across every boardroom in Seoul. And that she had just awakened a curse older than the city itself. The morning after the rain, Seoul shimmered in silver and glass, a city where ambition never slept. From the 43rd floor of Vale Tower, the view stretched across the Han River, a skyline that seemed carved in light. Behind the tinted glass stood Ji-hoon Vale, motionless. His reflection merged with the cityscape, half man, half ghost. The night had ended, but his mind hadn't. He could still feel it, the warmth of Elena Park's pulse beneath his fingertips. 4 centuries of restraint and one brief human touch had undone it all. His assistant entered quietly. "Mr. Vale, your breakfast meeting with the European board is ready, and the tabloids have published something about last night." A pause. Ji-hoon didn't move. They say the coldest man in Seoul invited a stranger to dance. People are calling it the mercy of Vale. Ji-hoon's gaze shifted toward the city. Mercy. If only they knew. What he had felt wasn't mercy, it was hunger. A hunger he had learned to silence, buried under centuries of control. That control was his empire. Vale Corporation had its hands in everything: biotech, media, luxury, energy. To mortals, he was a visionary. To those who remembered what he truly was, he was a ruler of blood and silence. In the dim reflection of the window, he saw the faintest shimmer of his eyes, the color of storm clouds and ash. They used to be warm, long ago. Before the curse, he reached for a folder on his desk, a list of acquisitions, names, assets, contracts, all lifeless things. But for the first time in centuries, his mind wasn't on business. It was on the girl who had looked at him without fear. Hours later, he stood before the mirror in his private office. No reflection, only the faint outline of the city lights through the glass. He whispered, 400 years, and you still punish me for wanting to feel. The room responded with silence, eternal, loyal, cruel. Then, a sound, his phone vibrating. A message from an unknown number. Thank you, Mr. Vale. I didn't know who you were last night, but you saved me from breaking. Elena. He stared at it longer than he should have. Her name, bright, human, fragile, felt like sunlight against his skin. For a moment, Ji-hoon closed his eyes, letting the memory return. The way her fingers trembled in his, how her heartbeat had drowned the music. And beneath it all, something impossible, the faint resonance of a mark, an energy he hadn't felt since the 1800s. His pulse quickened, if it could be called that. Could she be connected to her, the one who had saved him before his curse had fully taken hold? No, impossible. Yet the echo remained, and with it came a thought that chilled him more than death itself. What if this girl wasn't just human? What if she was the reason he had survived all along? Outside, the lights of the city flickered like veins. Somewhere, among millions of heartbeats, one now belonged to him. And Ji-hoon Vale, the immortal CEO who ruled the modern world, had just begun to bleed again. The week after the incident, Ji-hoon Vale tried to bury the memory. He had survived centuries by suppressing emotion, by treating empathy like a contagion. Yet the image of her remained, the girl in the wheelchair who looked at humiliation and refused to break. When his assistant mentioned a foundation meeting that morning, he barely listened. Vale Corporation funded dozens of social initiatives. He signed the checks, but never attended. Still, something in him said, go. The boardroom lights were cold and surgical. Across the long glass table, representatives of a rehabilitation program waited to present their proposal. Ji-hoon entered without expression until his gaze stopped halfway down the line. Elena Park. She was there, hair pinned back, modest blazer, a folder balanced on her lap. Her voice trembled slightly as she began. Our program helps people with spinal injuries re-enter the workforce. What we lack is opportunity. He watched her. She wasn't fragile anymore. She was fierce, determined, commanding the room with quiet dignity. No trace of the girl from that restaurant, only the same pulse of courage that had once undone him. And why? He asked finally. Should my company support this? Her eyes met his, steady, calm. Because someone like you believes people like me can't lead. The room went silent. No one spoke to Ji-hoon Vale like that, not in centuries. Something dangerous flickered beneath his control: admiration, amusement, desire. He leaned forward slightly, his tone almost gentle. You shouldn't assume what I believe, Miss Park. Then prove me wrong. It was reckless, fearless, and he liked it. When the meeting ended, the others filed out quickly, sensing the tension that hung like static in the air. Ji-hoon remained seated. Elena gathered her papers, but her hand slipped. Sheets scattered across the polished floor. Without thinking, he knelt, centuries of restraint forgotten, and began picking them up. Her fingers brushed his. The contact was brief, electric. Her pulse hammered. He could hear it clear, rhythmic, alive. He looked up. Their eyes locked. For a fraction of a second, the world around them fell away. No walls, no titles, no rules. Just the faint scent of ink and human warmth, and a hunger that wasn't entirely his own. Elena spoke first, voice low. "You didn't have to help." "I did," he said quietly. "I just didn't realize why." And in that moment, Ji-hoon Vale, the man who owned empires, felt something he couldn't name, something terrifyingly human. Night descended like a secret. Ji-hoon stood in the glass corridor of his penthouse, the city glowing beneath him like veins of gold and fire. He hadn't fed in days, not because he couldn't, but because he didn't trust himself. He saw her face whenever he closed his eyes, not as prey, but as presence, a reminder that the centuries he'd spent mastering detachment were beginning to fracture. He poured a glass of red wine and stared at it, pretending it could fool his thirst. The illusion almost worked until he caught his reflection. A faint outline, hollow eyes, a man wearing humanity like a mask. He thought of Elena Park, her words still echoing. Then prove me wrong. No one had challenged him in centuries. No one had spoken to him as if he were mortal. And yet, beneath the sting of her defiance, he had felt something gratitude. He moved toward the piano in the corner of the room. It was an old European piece, something he'd kept from another life. His fingers hovered above the keys. He hadn't played since 1892. When he did, the notes were quiet, hesitant, and aching. Music filled the penthouse, fragile, human, disobedient. And somewhere in that melody, he realized what terrified him most. He wanted to be seen by her. The phone buzzed. A message from his assistant. "Sir, the press found the footage from the restaurant. It's everywhere." He opened the link. There he was, standing before Elena, offering his hand. The comments below were a storm. "The vampire CEO shows a rare act of compassion. Is Vale human after all?" He almost laughed. If they only knew. He turned off the screen and leaned against the piano, the sound of rain whispering against the glass. For centuries, he had lived in shadow, feeding on those who would never be missed. Now, the only thing he wanted to consume was her light, and that terrified him more than hunger ever had. He closed his eyes, pressing a hand to his chest. No heartbeat, only silence. But deep within it, a phantom rhythm began to stir, slow, painful, alive. Ji-hoon Vale had forgotten what it meant to feel. And the cruelest truth of all was dawning on him. Elena Park was not saving him. She was waking him. Days turned into a rhythm neither of them understood. Elena began visiting Vale Corporation more often. Meetings, updates, follow-ups. Ji-hoon never scheduled them, but he never canceled either. It became their quiet ritual. In the sterile calm of glass offices, something unspoken started to form. When she entered the room, the air changed, lighter, yet charged. When she spoke, his attention sharpened, not because of what she said, but because of how she said it, with conviction that carried warmth he hadn't felt in centuries. He offered to fund her entire project. She refused politely. "I want partnership, not pity." Her words lingered like perfume. So he compromised, invited her team to work in-house, under his company's resources. It was the first time anyone had ever shared his tower. Elena didn't see the way employees bowed in silence when he passed, or maybe she pretended not to. She treated him like a man, not a myth. She asked questions. She challenged decisions. She once laughed when he misused a phrase in English. No one had ever laughed at him. He found he didn't mind. Sometimes, when she struggled to reach a file or adjust her chair, he'd appear beside her without a sound. He learned the weight of her folders, the rhythm of her breathing, the subtle scent of jasmine she wore. She learned that his presence steadied a room, and that his eyes, beneath their calm, carried a sadness older than language. One night, working late, the lights flickered. She jumped slightly. Without thinking, he said softly, "I don't like the dark either." She smiled, a quiet, knowing thing. Then maybe we're both pretending to be braver than we are. Something cracked inside him, a small, human truth. He wanted to touch her hand again, to feel the pulse that reminded him he wasn't entirely lost. But he didn't, not yet. Because even though he had ruled centuries and empires, he couldn't remember the last time someone made him afraid to want. It happened on a night neither of them planned to share. A storm had trapped them inside the building after everyone else had gone. The lights in the upper floors glowed dim and gold, reflections trembling on the rain-soaked windows. Elena was finishing a report when the power flickered again. The elevator stopped working. Thunder rolled close. She sighed, half laughing. Guess the universe wants overtime. Jihoon was standing near the window, jacket off, sleeves rolled. The sight of him in that quiet light, sharp lines softened by the storm, made her heartbeat stumble. He turned, hearing it. That sound always found him. "You're not afraid," he said, almost to himself. "Of what?" "Of being here. With me." She met his eyes, calm but curious. "Should I be?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. The air between them tightened like a drawn bow. Every instinct he had told him to step back. Every emotion pulled him closer. When a flash of lightning cut the sky, she flinched. Papers slipped from her lap and scattered across the floor. He was beside her in less than a breath. Their hands collided as they both reached for the same page. The room fell silent. Her pulse raced beneath his fingertips. For a moment he forgot what he was, forgot the centuries of hunger and control. He looked at her throat, the fragile line of life he had denied himself for so long, and felt both thirst and awe. She whispered, barely audible, "Your hands are cold." "They always are." Her gaze lingered, steady. "Then let me warm them." She took his hand. The heat of her skin spread through him like dawn, painful and pure. His breath caught, his pupils darkened. For a heartbeat, he leaned closer, so close the scent of her pulse filled his lungs. But then he stopped. The storm outside broke open, rain hammering the glass, dragging him back to reason. He withdrew his hand slowly, voice rough. "You shouldn't offer warmth to something that feeds on it." She stared at him, confused by the words but sensing the weight behind them. He turned away, the stormlight outlining him like a confession he couldn't speak. And in that silence, they both knew. Whatever existed between them was no longer safe. Rumors spread faster than fire. By the end of the week, Vale Tower whispered with stories. Assistants spoke of late nights and closed doors, of their CEO's sudden distraction, of how the man who never smiled had begun to look almost alive. It reached the board. A dozen powerful men in tailored suits, loyal to Jihoon only out of fear, gathered in silence as he entered the conference room. "We're concerned," one began carefully, "about your involvement with the woman from the foundation." Jihoon's gaze lifted slowly. "You mean the program you ordered me to fund?" The man faltered. "Your public image, sir. You've built this company on precision, control. Emotion makes people question power." Emotion. He almost laughed. If only they knew what true power required to suppress. He dismissed them with a gesture, but as the door closed, something else stirred in the shadows. A voice, smooth and mocking. "They're right, you know. You're slipping." Jihoon turned sharply. A figure stepped from the dim corridor. Lucien, one of the oldest of his kind, the last remnant of the council that had once ruled the night. "You should have stayed asleep, Vale," Lucien said. "We agreed centuries ago, no attachments, no witnesses. You break the rule, and you bring the hunters back." "She knows nothing." "She doesn't have to. Look at you, feeding on her pulse without a bite. You're unraveling." Jihoon moved closer, voice low. I built this world so we could hide, so we could live. Don't lecture me about control." Lucien's smile was sharp. "Then control yourself. Because if you don't, I will." And just like that, he was gone, dissolving into shadow. Ji-hoon stood alone, fists clenched, the faint scent of iron in the air. For the first time in centuries, he wasn't sure which danger frightened him more, the monsters who once ruled beside him, or the woman who had made him forget he was one. That night, he watched the city from his penthouse again, unable to shake the feeling that every light below hid a pair of eyes. Somewhere out there, the past was moving. And it was coming for her. The night pressed close, heavy with rain. Ji-hoon stood before the window again. City lights fractured across the glass. He could feel it, something watching. Every instinct he'd buried for centuries whispered the same warning. They're coming. When the knock came, it wasn't timid. Elena entered before he could speak, eyes bright with anger. "You canceled the project. Why?" He turned slowly, his voice too calm. It was becoming dangerous. "For who? Me? Or your reputation?" She rolled closer, ignoring the shadows deepening at the edges of the room. "You're not the man people say you are, Ji-hoon. I saw you that night you cared." Her words struck like sunlight through frost. Cared. He had forgotten how that word felt. But she didn't understand. Couldn't. He walked toward her, each step a silent confession. "You don't know what I am, Elena." "Then tell me." He hesitated, the truth burning at the back of his throat. For 400 years, he had protected his kind by hiding what they were. To tell her now would undo everything. Yet to keep silent might destroy her. Lightning split the skyline, painting his face pale, almost inhuman. She saw it, the faint gleam in his eyes, the unnatural stillness. Her breath caught. "Ji-hoon, I'm not what you think." He reached for her hand. His skin was ice, his pulse non-existent. She stared at their joined fingers, realization dawning. "You. Say nothing," his voice cracked. "If they know you've seen, they'll come for you." "Who will?" "The ones I kept hidden. The ones who remember what hunger means." Silence. Just the sound of rain against glass and her heartbeat steady, terrified, alive. "Then let them come," she said finally. "You built this world to protect people like me. Don't start destroying it to protect yourself." He looked at her, small, human, defiant, and something inside him broke open. "You think I fear death," he whispered. "No," she said softly. "You fear life." Her words undid him. He wanted to deny it, but the truth was there, pulsing between them like blood. And for the first time in centuries, Ji-hoon Vale made a decision not for survival but for love. He turned toward the door, voice low and final. "Pack your things. You're leaving this city tonight. I'll find you when it's safe. You can't fight them alone." He gave her a faint, tragic smile. "I've been alone for 400 years. I know how." And when he left, the scent of rain followed him like a promise and a goodbye. The storm had not stopped. By midnight, Vale Tower was surrounded not by police or journalists, but by shadows that moved without sound. Lucien's warning had become prophecy. Inside the building, alarms flickered uselessly. Ji-hoon walked through the darkened corridors, his steps measured, his mind still. He had lived too long to fear death, but now, for the first time, he feared loss. At the center of the lobby, the air thickened. From the glass elevators emerged Lucien, flanked by two others, their eyes reflecting crimson light. "You chose her over us," Lucien said, voice like silk torn on steel. "You made your empire with our blood, and now you throw it away for a mortal?" Ji-hoon's tone was calm, almost tired. "Maybe I finally remembered what we built it for." "You built it to survive," Lucien hissed, "and you've doomed us all." Before Ji-hoon could reply, the elevator doors opened behind him. "Elena?" She had come back. Rain clung to her hair, defiance blazing in her eyes. If you're going to destroy him, she said, you'll have to go through me. Lucien laughed, low and cruel. You think love will save you, girl? No, she said softly, but it might save him. The words pierced the silence. Jihoon moved before Lucien could touch her, faster than air, his hand at Lucien's throat, eyes burning silver. You will not touch her. They clashed, shadows against light. The walls cracked, glass shattered. The lobby became a storm of movement and sound, the collision of centuries of secrecy breaking apart. Lucien struck, fangs bared. Jihoon met him with a force that sent both crashing into the marble. Blood spread across the floor, ancient, dark, and burning. The other vampires hesitated. They saw something impossible, a king bleeding for a human. Elena wheeled forward despite the chaos. Stop, she shouted. You hide in darkness and call it safety, but he's the only one brave enough to face the light. Her voice cut through the noise, trembling but unbroken. Jihoon looked up at her, and for a moment even Lucien froze. He released his grip, letting Lucien fall back, gasping. Then Jihoon turned to the others, to his kind, his legacy, his curse. If humanity is weakness, he said, then I choose to be weak. He lifted his hand, pressing it to the shattered glass wall. Sunlight, pale and forbidden, began to seep through the clouds outside. The vampires recoiled, hissing, vanishing into the shadows. Lucien's glare burned with fury. You'll regret this, Vale. Maybe, Jihoon answered, voice fading, but at least I'll feel it. And as the first light touched his skin, the city finally saw him, not the CEO, not the myth, but the man who had dared to be both monster and human. The cameras caught everything. By morning, the world would know the truth. The immortal who bled for love. Morning arrived quietly, as if the city itself were holding its breath. The storm had passed, leaving the streets silver with rain and light. News screens flickered across buildings, replaying the impossible. The fall of Vale Tower. The man who faced the dawn. Inside a small rehabilitation center far from the city, Elena sat by a window. Her hands were still bruised from that night, but her eyes were calm. The doctors said she was lucky to be alive. She didn't feel lucky. She felt hollow, as if something ancient had been torn away. On the table beside her sat a single white envelope, delivered before sunrise. Inside, no words. Only a red rose, perfectly preserved. She touched its petals, soft as breath, and for a moment, she swore she heard it, that faint rhythm he once said he didn't have. A heartbeat, distant but steady. Outside, the sunlight spread across the hills, and the glass windows caught it like mirrors. Elena closed her eyes. You said you couldn't see the light, she whispered, so I'll see it for you. The rose glowed faintly in her hands, as if remembering the warmth that once bound them. And somewhere beyond the edges of dawn, where shadow met sky, a figure watched her through the soft gold haze. He was different now. The skin that once burned under daylight shimmered faintly but endured. Jihoon Vale stood beneath the rising sun, his hand wrapped around another rose, crimson like blood and memory. He smiled, a rare, fragile thing, and whispered her name to the wind. Elena. The sound disappeared into the morning, but she lifted her head as if she'd heard it anyway. The curse was broken, though neither would ever understand how. Maybe it wasn't magic, nor blood, nor sacrifice. Maybe it was simply this, that after 400 years of silence, a monster chose to love without feeding, and in doing so, became human again. The world moved on. The empire crumbled. But in quiet places where light met shadow, people still told the story of the immortal CEO who bled for a mortal girl. They said that love didn't save him. It remade him. And every dawn after, a single red rose bloomed on her windowsill untouched, unaging, a silent promise that somewhere, somehow, he was still watching the sunrise through her eyes.